What's up, YouTube? This is 82 and 0. Welcome back. So, today we're going to talk about the original big man, the first GOAT of the NBA. So, sit down and let me tell you about George Mikan. He was born June 18th, 1924, and he was born in Joliet, Illinois. And his parents, on his father's side, his grandparents immigrated from Croatia. He was born to a Croatian father named Joseph and a Lithuanian mother named Minnie. And he actually has a brother named Joe and Ed. I think Ed was the one who made the NBA as well. And he also has a sister named Mary. So his grandfather, now the Croatian way of saying George is I don't actually know how to pronounce it, but it's spelled Juraj. I think that's just George. But Mikan was born, the grandfather was born in Croatia, then part of Austria-Hungary in 1874. George immigrated to Pennsylvania in 1891, where he married another Croatian immigrant named Mirija. In 1906, in Pennsylvania, Mikan's father, Joseph, was born. And soon after, the family moved to Joliet, Illinois. And this is where Mikan would be born and grow up. Now, as a boy, Mikan actually shattered one of his knees so bad that he was actually in a bed for a year and a half. And in 1938, he attended the Chicago Archbishop Seminary. So his original goal is he wanted to be a Catholic priest because he went to a Catholic high school in Illinois, and he would enter Chicago's DePaul University, which is a Catholic university. And when he went to college, in 1942 he stood at 6'10" and weighed 245 pounds. But he was very awkwardly moving. What I mean by this is he wasn't coordinated at all. And he actually had nearsightedness really bad. That's why he wore those thick glasses. And, this is going to sound very weird to people who are not really versed in the basketball history. Basketball before the NBA. Believe it or not, but back then, people thought tall people can't play basketball. And the reason why is because a lot of tall people are very clumsy. And so it wasn't uncommon to see a center be like 6'2", 6'1". And this is why it infuriates me when you see people who say Wilt Chamberlain's era was 6'4" centers, because that's not the era, all right? This is the era where there were 6'4" centers. But anyways, while in high school, Mikan met a 28-year-old rookie coach at DePaul University. The coach's name was Ray Meyer. Meyer saw potential in Mikan, and he had the idea that what if there was a tall center down low who could dominate? And he didn't just look at Mikan as a basketball talent, but he looked at him as a bright and intelligent young man who he could kind of mentor himself. And Meyer's thoughts were very revolutionary for the time, when it was still believed that tall players were too awkward to ever play basketball well. In the following months, Meyer transformed Mikan into a confident, aggressive player who took pride in his height, rather than being ashamed of it. Meyer and Mikan worked out intensively, and Mikan learned how to make hook shots accurately with either hand. He taught him how to be ambidextrous. This routine would become later known as the Mikan drill, which anybody who's played basketball has heard that. In addition, Meyer made Mikan punch a speed bag, take dancing lessons, jump rope to make him a complete athlete. Now, Mikan dominated his peers from the start of the NCAA college games. Once he got his coordination down, he imitated opponents with his size and his strength. He was unstoppable on offense with his hook shots, and soon established a reputation as one of the hardest, grittiest players in the league, often playing through injuries and pushing opposing centers with hard fouls. In addition, Mikan also surprised the basketball world with his ability. Sorry about that. With his ability to reach the hoop, he had long arms, right? I'm not exactly sure what his wingspan was, but he could definitely just put it in the hole. And I want to talk about how rules were changed because of him. Because Mikan surprised the basketball world with his ability to goaltend, swatting the balls in flight before they could reach the hoop. And also zone defenses that had four men in the key defending Mikan. These are two rules that they would implement because of him. And later they would widen the lanes because of him. And later, not so much because of him, but because of what teams would do because of him, they would implement a shot clock. So he was very dominant, and he brought a lot of changes in terms of rules because of his dominance. And later you'd see in the NBA a lot of teams complain that he was too dominant and it wasn't fair. And as a consequence, the NCAA and later the NBA outlawed touching a ball either after it reaches the apex in flight or it had touched the backboard. And to tell you about another big man during this time, Bob Kirkland, who was 7 foot, a tall center for Oklahoma A&M, was one of the few opposing centers that had any success against Mikan. Mikan was named the Helms NCAA College Player of the Year in 1944 and 1945, and he was an All-American 3 times. In 1945, he led DePaul to the NIT title, which at the time was as prestigious as the NCAA title. Mikan led the nation in scoring with 23.9 points per game in the 1944-45 and 23.1 in the 1945-46. When DePaul won the 1945 NIT, Mikan was named the most valuable player for scoring 120 points in 3 games, including 53 points in a 97-53 win over Rhode Island. His 53-point total equated the score of the Rhode Island team. It's kind of crazy. He scored more at the same amount as the opposing team. But what happened to him after college? Now, for anybody watching, you kind of got to think about basketball before the NBA, because we got this recency bias in our mind. We think times were always the same, but think about it. Back then, there wasn't an NBA yet. It wasn't going to be around for a few years. There were small basketball leagues all over the country. So a lot of players back then in the 30s and 40s, their NCAA career was, for lack of better terms, their professional basketball career. So what happened? What would happen? Well, there's a predecessor basketball league to the NBA, which I'll get into. It's called the NBL. And I'm sure a lot of people have never heard of this. But this was, I don't want to say the first professional basketball league, because from everything you read about, there were always like little leagues around the country. But the NBL was like I want to say the first major one. But their first season was in 1937, and they folded in 1949 when they merged with the BAA. Now, the BAA was first season was in 46-47. So the NBL and the BAA merged to become the NBA. Just remember that because we'll get into that for a second. So the NBL was technically the professional basketball league. Um, Anyways, George Mikan would sign. There wasn't really a draft, I don't think, back then. I think you would just sign a contract. He would sign with the after the 45-46 college season, he would sign with the Chicago American Gears of the National Basketball League. He played with them for 25 games at the end of the 46-47 NBL season, scoring 16.5 points per game as a rookie. Mikan led the Gears to third place at the 1946 World Professional Basketball Tournament, where he was selected most valuable player after scoring 100 points in 5 games. And he was also voted to the All NBL team. However, before the start of the 1947-48 NBL season, I do want to mention that they won a championship, the Chicago American Gears, in 46-47 with George Mikan as a rookie. So that's championship number 1. Now, you got to understand the NBL wasn't as secure as the NBA would later be. Teams would fold, they would go to other leagues. So, like I say, at the start of the 47-48 NBL season, Maurice White, the president of the American Gear Company and the owner of the American Gears NBL team. That's another thing. The NBL would frequently name their teams after their owners. So you'd see the American Gears or the Zollner Pistons after Fred Zollner. Imagine a team today named like the the Zuckerberg Cavaliers or something. So this owner, he wanted to pull the team out of the NBL. And he had plans to create a new basketball league. And he wanted 24 teams in this league. This was just his goal, right? And he was going to name it the Professional Basketball League of America, the PBLA, in which he owned all the teams and arenas. However, the league folded after just 1 month. And the players of White's team, that was the owner, Maurice White, were equally distributed among the 11 remaining NBL franchises. As a consequence, every team had a 9.09% chance of landing Mikan. And you know who took him? Drum roll. Minneapolis Lakers. It's funny how things always work out for the Lakers. And the Minneapolis Lakers were in the NBL. And they had a legendary coach in John Kunla. Now, Kunla, he's one of the most underrated coaches of all time, in my opinion. He actually recently passed. He died in 2017 at the age of 101. He was still living in the Minneapolis area. But anyways, in his first season with the Lakers, Mikan led the league in scoring with 1,195 points, becoming the only NBL player to score more than 1,000 points in an NBL season. Following the regular season, he was named the league's MVP, and the Lakers won the NBL title. That's championship number 2 for Mikan. In April 1948, he led the Lakers to victory in the World Professional Basketball Tournament, where he was named MVP after scoring a tournament record 40 points against New York Renaissance in a title-clinching game. The following year, the Lakers and 3 other NBL franchises. This is what I was talking about, how teams would jump around leagues. The Minneapolis Lakers decided to go over to the BAA, this new basketball league that was more secure. They had teams in bigger markets. So Mikan led his new league in scoring and again set a single season scoring record. And this time they would get championship number 3. The Lakers defeated the Washington Capitals in the 1949 BAA Finals. Now, in 1949, this is when the BAA and the NBL would merge. And the inaugural season in 1949-50, this would be the first technical NBA season. Now, the NBA recognizes the BAA history, but it doesn't recognize the NBL history. So, this is why they don't count Mikan's championships with the NBL. But you know what? This is a basketball history podcast. I count them. All right. So, right now, he's at ring number 3. So, like I said, the leagues merged, right? And now in the 49-50 season, they had 17 teams, with the Lakers in the Central Division. Mikan again was dominant, averaging 27.4 points per game, and they didn't keep track of rebounds yet, but I'm guessing him to be in the ballpark of 14 to 15. And he took another scoring title. Alex Groza of the Indianapolis and Olympians was the only other player to break the 20-point barrier that year. Now, this is something I want to talk about. So, back then, I'm talking pre-shot clock basketball, teams would score like 80 points a game, 79, 80. So, you might look at Mikan's numbers of 27 points per game as being like, okay, so what? That's the equivalent of somebody scoring like 39. He was pretty dominant for his time. Now, he led his team to a 51-17 record, stomping through the playoffs. In the 1950 NBA Finals, they defeated the Syracuse Nationals. And you know what's crazy? Bob Harrison hit a 40-foot buzzer beater to give the Minneapolis Lakers a 2-point win. The team split the next of the four games, and in Game 6, the Lakers won 110-95 and won their first ever NBA championship. Mikan scored 31.3 points per game in the playoffs. Now, let's talk about. I consider this Minneapolis Lakers team to be like the first dynasty, okay? So, they repeated now. He won with the Gears. He won with the Lakers in the NBL. He won one when they were in the BAA. And now he won his first one in the NBA. They defeated the Syracuse Nationals. Most dominant team in basketball. Now, in 1951, unfortunately, Mikan would get hurt and the team wouldn't be able to repeat. I do think, I never put an asterisk on injuries or anything like that, but I do think they would have won had he been healthy for 1951. But one thing I want to say is, with no shot clock invented yet, what teams would do to kind of, this is really sad, to try to stop Mikan was they would just run the clock, or they would just run the ball. Like they'd get the ball, dribble it for minutes on end. Once they have the lead, they would do everything in their power to keep Mikan from being able to get the ball. And it got so bad that in a game against the Fort Wayne Pistons, the Pistons took a 19-18 lead, afraid that Mikan would take a comeback if he got the ball. So the Pistons just ran out the time of the game by passing the ball to each other. And there's no shot clock to force them to take a move or anything. The score stayed 19-18 to make it the lowest scoring NBA game of all time. And I mean, who the hell would want to go see that game? If you're a fan, you want to just sit there and watch someone dribble a ball. I'm really glad that they implemented the shot clock, because had there not been implemented the shot clock, who would have watched basketball? So in the 1951-52 season, the NBA decided to widen the foul line from under the basket from 6 feet to 12 feet because Mikan was so dominant down low. They wanted to kind of limit his dominance. It forced big men like Mikan to post up from double the distance. A main proponent of the rule was the New York Knicks coach, who regarded Mikan as his nemesis and dubbed him as the Mikan rule. While Mikan still scored an impressive 23.8 points per game, it was a serious reduction from the 27.4 points per game. And his field goal percentage sunk from 42% to 38%. And this is when you start seeing his numbers start to go down. But a lot of it is because of injury, too. Um, he dealt with a lot of injuries in his career, like broken legs and broken arms. This man was made out of glass. But he was tough as shit. He played through it, but it took a toll on his body. And, anyways, they would repeat as champion, or not repeat, but they would reclaim the crown in 1952, defeating the New York Knicks in 7 games. Mikan would score 22 points and grab 19 rebounds in that game 7. Now, then this would be the start of their three-peat. They defeat the Knicks again in 1953. Then in 1954, they would defeat the Syracuse Nationals and the Rochester Royals in the first round, then the Syracuse Nationals, their two rivals, and that would be his final championship. Game 7, they would defeat them 87-80. And it was actually Jim Pollard on the Lakers who would have the most points. But nonetheless, George Mikan gets his 5th official NBA championship and his 7th total championship. Now, Mikan would retire because his legs were just killing him. And he was only 29 years old in the 53-54 season. And he wouldn't stay retired for very long. He'd come back for the 55-56 season. And he'd only play 37 games and only play 20 minutes per game, putting up 10 points and 8 rebounds. But by this point, there wasn't much they could do. The team went 33-39. They lost to the St. Louis Hawks. So that is George Mikan's actual playing career. One of the most dominant players of all time. Now, if you look at his NBA and ABA stats, he's a Hall of Famer. He's a 4-time All-Star. 4-time scoring champion if you count the NBL. 1953 rebound champ. They didn't keep track of rebounds early in the NBA or in the NBL. He's a 7-time champion when you count the BAA, NBA, and NBL. And he's an 8-time All-BAA, All-NBA, All-NBL team. He's on the NBA 75 and 50 anniversary team. He has career averages of 23.1 points, 13.4 rebounds. Now, what happened to him after basketball? When he was in college, he was studying law, right? And in 1956, right after he was done playing, he was the Republican candidate for the United States Congress in Minnesota's 3rd Congressional District. He challenged incumbent Representative Roy Wire in a closely fought race that featured a high voter turnout. Despite the re-election of incumbent President Dwight Eisenhower, the inexperienced Mikan lost by a close margin of 52% to 48%. Wire received 127,356 votes to Mikan's 117,716 votes. Returning with his legal profession, Mikan was frustrated after hoping to find an influx of work. For 6 months, Mikan did not get any assignments at all, leaving him in financial difficulties that forced him to cash in on his life insurance, which I'll get into in a minute why this is bad. Problems arose with Mikan's professional sports career. In the 57-58 season, Lakers coach John Kunla became the general manager and persuaded Mikan to become a coach of the Lakers. Now, Mikan, he needed a job, so he decided to take coaching, But he wasn't very good at coaching. Yes, he was a great player, but not every player is good at coaching. And his overall coaching record is he went 9-30 with the Lakers in the 57-58 season as a coach, and they ended up firing him. And not only would this be bad for him, this would be bad for Minneapolis because the team would go 19-53 that year, and their turnout was just awful. Now, this would hurt Minneapolis ball because with the team's attendance, like as far as fans going dwindling, it really hurt the franchise. And it wouldn't be until the 59-60 season that'd be their final season in Minneapolis. They just couldn't make it financially in Minneapolis. The team almost went bankrupt. And if it weren't for Elgin Baylor, who was drafted there, who put fans in the seats, the team probably would have folded. And I think Mikan took that very hard on himself. Because for years after the team left Minneapolis, he tried to get a team back in Minneapolis, and he eventually did with the Timberwolves. But I think he took that personal. And he went back into real estate and focusing on his legal career, just raising his family in Minneapolis. But in 1967, Mikan returned to professional basketball after becoming the first commissioner of the ABA. He used his background in law to become the commissioner of the ABA, which I think everybody watching knows what the ABA was. It was a competitor basketball league to the NBA that arose in the late 60s, lasted to the mid 70s, and merged with the NBA. And he implemented a lot of stuff that made the ABA different. For example, Mikan decided to use a red, white, and blue ball for the ABA. He said it was more patriotic and it was funner to watch on TV, and it pleased the crowd's eyes. And he also, although he didn't come up with the 3-point line, he implemented it and popularized it. In the mid 1980s, Mikan headed on a task force with a goal of returning professional basketball to Minneapolis. Decades after the Lakers moved to Los Angeles to become the LA Lakers, he finally got the Minnesota Timberwolves. I do want to mention the ABA had the Minnesota Muskies and the Minnesota Pipers. And you can watch old interviews with him during this time. He really wanted a team in Minneapolis. He loved the city of Minneapolis. In 1994, Mikan became part owner and chairman of the board of the Chicago Cheetahs, a professional roller hockey team based in Chicago that played in Roller Hockey International. The franchise folded after their second season. Now, I wish I could really say that towards the end of Mikan's life, he dealt with a lot. He suffered from diabetes. He had failing kidneys. He had to have a right leg amputated because of his diabetes, and he didn't have medical insurance at the end of his life. And the NBA didn't pay for players prior to 1965. So, I'm trying to think how to explain this. He fought a long legal battle against the NBA and the NBA Players Union, saying that the older players should get a pension of $1,700 a month. And the NBA doesn't cover anybody prior to 1965. I think they've changed that recently, though. Don't quote me on that. But anyways, Mikan hoped to be alive when a new collective bargaining agreement would finally help his family. Unfortunately, he died in 2005 from complications of diabetes. He passed away June 1st, 2005. And Shaquille O'Neal actually covered a lot of his funeral expenses and medical bills so his family wouldn't be in debt. His death was felt all over the basketball world. I was a little too young to remember this, but going back and studying this, people must have felt then how they feel now with Russell passing. For example, in Game 5 of the 2005 Eastern Conference Finals between the Heat and Pistons, they took a moment of silence to honor Mikan. And I remember there were teams that were wearing patches, and O'Neal, like I said, paid a lot of the costs. And he said, without number 99, there's no me. And, I always love this classic picture of Mikan wearing O'Neal's jersey and O'Neal wearing Mikan's jersey. You could tell Shaq really loved Mikan and respected him. So let's talk about how Mikan was as a person. He definitely changed basketball for the best. He implemented a lot of important rule changes. Well, not implemented himself, but he was the cause of a lot of rule changes that made basketball better. And he helped make basketball popular in those early days. you know. And he was a good human being. Um, when you look research into him about stories with how he interacted with young players, he was a mentor for Shaq and a mentor for Kareem. And one story I want to give is Bill Russell actually grew up idolizing George Mikan. And many people probably don't realize this, but Bill Russell actually met George Mikan. So Bill Russell said in his book, Go Up for Glory, he used to go outside of baseball game because he grew up in Oakland, right? He would go outside of the minor league games and wait for players to come out so he could hope to get an autograph. And he said, definitely given the racial climate of the time, the minor league players would spit on him and call him obscenities, call him the N word, just horrible stuff, how he was treated. So his image of pro athletes was pretty negative. But one day, George Mikan was playing an exhibition game in Oakland. And he went out of the arena, or he went out after the game was over to meet the kids. And one of the reasons why this is when George Mikan was a kid, he met Babe Ruth, and it made such an impact on him that he wanted to meet young fans. And he met Bill Russell. And what he said to Russell was, "Hey there, big fella," And Russell was obviously in high school. So Russell kind of thought it was funny because this big 6'10", 240-pound man calling me, who's 6'5" at the time, big fella. And Russell said that he looked at him as a human being. And this changed his perception of athletes. And Mikan talked to him for quite a bit that day. And Mikan said, do me a favor. When you make it someday in basketball, because, Russell told him he wants to be a professional basketball player someday. Mikan says, when you make it someday, make sure you play for the Lakers, which is funny because he ended up playing for the Celtics. So Mikan was all the way around a good man. It's sad to see those older players really struggled financially because the league wouldn't compensate them and help them out. And they're what made the NBA. And it's really sad how far from glory how far from glory these older players have fallen. People just don't have a lot of respect for them anymore. And Mikan is a true, true, true pioneer of the game. You like these 3-point era? Well, he's the one that made it popular. The NBA might not have implemented that 3-point line if it weren't for him. Making it popular in the ABA. You're a Timberwolves fan? There might not have been a Timberwolves if it weren't for him campaigning to get a team in Minneapolis again. He likes centers, big men dominating down low. He's what made that popular. You know, he's, in my opinion, the first GOAT of the NBA, and he deserves all the praise and recognition in the world. So rest in peace, George Mikan. Thanks for watching.